B770 is appearing in drivers. The 9060 XT looks to be mighty fast, and I'm gonna disagree with the entire internet, apparently. Comment response is gonna be spicy. Let's get into the hot news, everybody. I'm your Brett host. We're gonna be going over the hottest tech news I can find on the internet while you enjoy your breakfast this Thursday, May 29th, 2025. And we're gonna start off today talking about something that we kind of discussed yesterday, which is the Intel Arc B770. The latest reports that are coming out is that we're expected to see this GPU launch in Q4 of 2025, and now we're starting to see it pop up into the Linux Mesa graphics driver. So this is just a continuation of kind of showing that it is likely to come out at some point. Again, just discussing the fact that there has been rumors that it's not coming out, that we were not going to get a B770, but as time is marching forward, there's more and more evidence that this GPU is going to hit the scenes, hopefully sooner rather than later, so that it can help everybody get a good grasp on firm competition in the PC space. Speaking of things that are firm in the PC space, today's video sponsor.
Raggy? yeah, sorry, Shaggy. We caught the bird monster at the Carnegie Museum.
Let's go, man. Great work, Scoop.
Yeah, it's just like right there. Can't fly, so we're ready to do the explanation we always do. You know, at the end of the episode.
All right, dude. Let's get down to it. Just as I thought, man. That's a Falcon Northwest Tiki PC, the smallest micro tower on the market.
So you're telling me this monster with feathers isn't a bird monster, and it's a custom-built PC specifically for us?
Man, I don't understand what you're not getting with this. We do these reveals every episode. They can also do custom artwork too.
So you're telling me that bird is this small? It can fit a 5090?
If by bird you mean this obvious PC, then yes.
All right, Mr. Smarty Pants. If you know so much about Falcon Northwest, who's in charge?
Easy, man. It's been the same guy from the start. But Falcon Northwest is way more than just one dude, man.
All right, fine, Shaggy. If you've already solved this, name all the case options.
Come on, Scoob, you're throwing softies, man. Talon, mid-tower, frag box, small form factor. Oh, and our pal, the Tiki.
Whoa. All right. You seem to know all the evidence. But does this explain the warranty and support options?
It sure does, man. All Falcon Northwest PCs come with a 3-year warranty and 1 year of overnight service. Standard.
All right, dude, I get it. You know your custom PC builders.
Scoob, man. You're majorly slacking, man. Falcon Northwest makes PCs for everyone, not just gamers. Content creation, business applications. You do it all.
That's probably why they were named one of PC Mag's best products of 2024.
That's enough chit chat, boys. Let's see who this really is.
Old Man Falcon!
Falcon Northwest is awesome. We've been working with them for years, whether it's the charity streams, which they've provided PC giveaways for us with the custom SRF liveries, or it's just sponsoring hot news. It's been great to partner with them, especially with the amount of love that they have for the PC enthusiast community, the products that they make, and just their presence in the PC hardware community. It's been fantastic to have them. Big thanks to Falcon Northwest for sponsoring today's video. Well, you know what's bigger than Falcon Northwest's entire presence in the PC industry? It's gonna be Intel's latest Diamond Rapids processor. Goodness, this thing is massive. We're finding out that this thing has 9,324 pins that are being used, but actually have over 10,000 total pins in the LGA 9324 CPU, the 700-watt Diamond Rapids Xeon processors that are going to be made for various different, compute applications that are out there. This is a massive chip, just with a bajillion pins. This is a lot. This is a gigantic CPU and shows Intel's CPU methodology versus AMD's. Currently, Intel has a socket that is actually around 7,500 pins, being called the LGA 7529. And then AMD's EPYC chip is currently on 6,096 pins. So this is a massive step up from both of these in a huge way. And then also on the power side of it, 700 watts for a CPU is it's ridiculous. And once you account for all of the sensor and debugging pins, it's going to be 10,096. This is a huge CPU. It is monstrous, gargantuan even. This is prodigious in so many different ways. It's going to be hilarious to potentially see in person if I ever get to do that. I wonder how it compares to my gigantic banana hands. But you know what's also prodigious in the space right now? AI, at least in nomenclature, right? At least in the discussion and the impact that it has has on companies' bottom lines. You got Long Island AI, all of those different companies they're renaming, and Microsoft dropping the beta for their AI that's supposed to help you game. Copilot for Gaming is now available as a companion app that you can get on your Android or iPhone to allow you to ask it questions. That is somehow slightly better than just doing this in browser, I guess. I guess it's because it's dedicated to gaming. This is better than a Google search AI overview somehow. It'll also integrate with like your Xbox achievements, so you can ask it about your account history or like ask it specific details. I'm curious who needs this or wants this or who's going to use it. Let me know if you're gonna try this out down below in those comments, because I'm gonna need something else to talk about after today. I'm gonna rile you people up. I'm not looking forward to it, but I am looking forward to Reece saving you money. Let's see what he has for the deal side of things.
Yo, welcome back to UFD Deals, bringing the hottest tech deals out on the internet. Hope you guys are doing well, and I'll jump straight into the deals for you guys. Starting off with this Unused, I think that's how you say it, 15.6-inch 1080p USB-C portable monitor going for only $49.99, making it $20 off. These little portable monitors are perfect for anything like Spotify or Discord, anything that doesn't need a main monitor. But then next up, we have the PlayStation DualSense wide controller available in Midnight Black, which let's all agree is the best colorway for these things, going for only $54.88, making it $20.11 off. And then lastly, we have the Sennheiser HT660S2 with these wired studio headphones going for $349.99, making it $329.96 off. You guys know I'm the biggest Sennheiser fanboy, but it's well deserved, and these things are amazing. And with that, the deals are done. You can find these and more linked in the video description down below. But until next time, I'm gonna hand you back to Brett for the rest of your hot news. Cheers.
Well, Reece, if you got an iPad, you're getting a better deal because Apple's self-service is now rolling out to iPads. This has been available for various different products in their product line, such as iPhones as well as MacBooks, and now iPads is getting availability for you to order their parts as well as their repair kit, and then you can actually repair the iPad yourself in a more comprehensive way. This is something that Apple's just been developing, trying to get a more robust repair program, not just for people, but also for independent third-party repair shops. It's something that is getting better as time is going on. It's not perfect, but it is an improvement that we're seeing. And CD Projekt Red is improving the status of Cyberpunk 2 because that's officially what it's going to be called. CD Projekt Red announcing that it is out of the conceptualization phase, at which point it was known as Project Orion, and now it has made it into pre-production phase, which means they're starting to finally develop the game, and it's going to be called Cyberpunk 2. Now, this means that it is probably forever away. This is going to take a long time in development, as did the original Cyberpunk. But with this announcement, they also divulged that they have sold 10 million copies of Phantom Liberty DLC, as well as over 60 million copies of The Witcher 3, which, as mentioned in yesterday's episode, just hit 10 years old. So big games coming out from CD Projekt Red, and you probably won't hold on to your 9060 XT for Cyberpunk 2, but potentially playing Cyberpunk 1 or The Witcher 3, you're going to get better FPS because the first benchmarks are coming out about this that aren't from AMD, and it shows that it's actually a pretty decent generational uplift if you look at like the card it's replacing. Again, we don't know how this product is going to hit the market in terms of pricing. Once AMD has set its MSRP, that hasn't translated into real world pricing, so we'll have to wait and see if this does deliver at $299 and $349, but the numbers are showing that it definitely beats out the 7600 XT by a considerable margin, at least in OpenCL and Vulkan scoring, but it doesn't come close to the 5060 Ti as AMD said that it should be when they announced it just a week ago. Now, obviously, these are Geekbench 6 scores. These do not translate into games, but they just kind of give us a rough translation of what we can expect generally out of it. And AMD kind of underperforms in synthetic benchmarks and then kind of overperforms in video games because they develop for that. And so likely AMD probably wasn't fudging too many numbers when it comes to comparing the 9060 XT to the 5060 Ti, but compared to the 7600 XT, it absolutely is rocking. Now we have to wait until next week for the June 5th launch date of the 9060 XT. I'm not quite sure when the review embargo will be up for this. If I had to guess, June 4th makes the most sense, just the day before. And so we should have details coming out ahead of time about the performance before it releases. At least hopefully. Hopefully AMD's not pulling an NVIDIA where it's there's no pre-release drivers and you can't review it ahead of time. I mean, they're definitely at least not doing it during a major trade expo when all the tech YouTubers are going to be out of their stations to do proper reviewing. So that's a plus, that's a bonus. But I know that I won't get any bonus points for what I'm about to do in comment response because I read through all of the comments of everybody discussing with me about the issue of naming the 9060 XT 8 gig and the 9060 XT 16 gig. So I'm just going to highlight, you know, a bunch of the different responses that I saw and then kind of give my summarization of my thoughts at the end, because I think fundamentally I just disagree with the ideas that are being thrown out here. But as mentioned, it seemed like there was like a group think happening where people were just kind of parroting a YouTuber's talking points, and it definitely seems like that's the case. A lot of people indicating that it was Hardware Unboxed that people started quoting, which makes a lot of sense because typically when they start to talk about something, it becomes a very hard sticking point that people get really aggressive about. I saw a lot of that in the comments. There's just a lot of aggression tied to this stuff. So you got people like D. Peter saying it's a pretty big problem with the names for the 8 versus 16 gigabyte cards. Take the 5060. The 16 gig version should be called the RTX 5060. And the 8 gig version should be called not produced or just kidding, don't waste your money. And then you got people like Stephen Loney saying, back in the day, I bought a 3rd gen iPod Touch for development purposes, but I didn't need storage space. I opted for the 8 gig model. However, I would later discover that the 8 gig model is actually 2nd gen hardware. Only the 16 and 32 gig model were actually 3rd gen hardware. And then Oraline saying your VRAM argumentation sounded like it has always been BS, so it's fine if it stays BS. Good job defending greedy companies. And then Alex responded to that saying, and not only VRAM, stuff like the RX 580 2048 SP, 1063 gig versus 6 gig, 3050 6 gig versus 8 gig, and so on. They aren't even the same GPU core, but share same name by some reason. Imagine if 7900 XT, 7900 GRE, and 7900 XTX were simply all named 7900, despite one card being much better than the others. And then Destral saying the naming thing about the 8 gigabyte and 16 gigabyte model is something Hardware Unboxed mentioned in one of the reviews, so the comment section is likely parroting that stance. Basically, they want there to be a better indication on which version you are buying. So yes, this has been a thing since the 1063 gig versus the 1066 gig. Hardware Unboxed and a few other reviewers were like there to be more clarity with product naming. Now that part aside, I doubt that would ever happen. There's already a glut of SKUs, unless we want GPU product stacks to start looking like Intel CPU boondoggle with 5,000 different SKUs for identical products. It's not likely to happen. And then Half Killing saying, I honestly understand both sides of the argument here. On the one hand, it's normally the same GPU core. On the other hand, it is technically a different card since it's got a different amount of VRAM. Perhaps a name change is justified. Maybe calling the 9060 XT 16 gig the 9060 XTX or something similar could be justifiable. And then Mad Max saying, I don't get why you're defending them naming an inferior product exactly the same way. We should accept it because they've been doing it this way for years. What kind of logic is this? They should call inferior ones light, L, or something. And then Buzz Dallas saying, you're too optimistic. People often do not pay attention, and they most definitely will buy the worst card. I made a similar mistake as a teenager, unfortunately. And I could totally understand why at least 2/3 of all gamers out there don't care too much about details. They just want their 60 series NVIDIA GPU because it's good and cheap and AMD drivers suck. On top of that, the issue was always there, but the number of PC gamers was much smaller than it is today, so almost nobody talked about it. We lived in different times, literally. All right, so that's just kind of a smattering of a bunch of the different replies that I got to my discussion of it. And I think maybe I didn't clarify some of my points clearly because I think people were saying that I was defending certain things that I said were the big problems, and then there are things that I don't think are problems at all. So like going back to Stephen Loney's thing about buying a 3rd gen iPod Touch that actually wasn't 3rd gen even though it was included with it, with the storage thing being different. I would equate that to being something like the GTX 1060, where the 6 gig and the 3 gig were actually 2 different cards. That's actually a big problem. I actually don't agree with that. Naming them the same thing, despite there being more differences than the VRAM, is a problem. It shouldn't have been called the 1063 gig, it should have been called something else because it wasn't fundamentally a 1060. It was actually less than a 1060. With there being fewer CUDA cores, and less RAM. So I feel like that's the same situation that Steven's pointing out here. It's not just a difference in capacity, it's a difference in the fundamentals of the graphics card. And then there were several people who pointed out that the 7600 and the 7600 XT is one of those examples where previously the name was different for the amount of VRAM difference, which is, you know, a healthy example, but is not the most common one that's out there. But I also want to point out, one of the reasons why I think it's okay to name it the 9060 XT 8 gig and the 9060 XT 16 gig is because the only difference between them is the VRAM. And so there is a naming difference. It is the 8 and 16. It's a distinguisher. It's the suffix by which you can understand the difference. And that's kind of in response to people like Mad Max saying that their inferior one should be called Light or L, or D. Peters talking about the 50, 60, 16 gig and 8 gig version. I think the problem here is, what is the fundamental difference between the suffix of XT, XTX, or no suffix, and actually demarking the suffix with the VRAM amount? Like, it's the same general idea at that point. You're giving a suffix to denote what actually is the difference between the card. The thing I want to point out about D. Peters' comment is that he's talking about the wrong card because he doesn't include the suffix of the card that actually has the VRAM difference. It's not the 5060. The 5060 is only 8 gigs, and then there is a 5060 Ti 8 gig and 5060 Ti 16 gig. So there's multiple suffixes to denote what's actually going on there. And I think that's allowable if the only difference is the VRAM amount. It's in the name. It's on the box. It's in many different places that tell you, hey, this card is fundamentally the same besides the VRAM. Yes, you will get different performance out of it, but the only difference, the only reason you'll get different performance is the VRAM. Unlike with the 1063 gig and the 1066 gig, which indicate to you that the only difference is the VRAM based on the name, that's actually not true. I think it's totally allowable if the GPU core is the same and the only difference is the VRAM to call it by its VRAM amount, because that's the distinguishing feature. I don't see a problem with that. I don't think it's hiding anything. I don't think it's deceiving customers. It's giving them a clear distinction of what the difference is. And it's not the argument that it's always been nonsense, so it's fine if it stays nonsense. I pointed out that in some instances, it made sense. With the 480 and 580, the only difference between those was the VRAM amount. So calling them the same card with different VRAM amounts is totally fine, because that's exactly what they are. Same card, different VRAM amounts. So that's actually what's happening with the 9060 XT. Same card, different VRAM amounts. It's the same situation. Some people pointed out that it's worse because you're gonna get a significant performance difference. That was true back then as well. We just don't remember it, and we don't bring up the specific examples where you were going to have a worse time on the 4 gigabyte card versus the 8 gigabyte card. I find it fascinating that a lot of the comments out there are arguing that the suffix of XT, GRE, XTX, whatever, are more sensible to consumers than actually denoting numerical values. Like, the numerical value seems more cut and dry and less having to be in the knowledge of what the specific enthusiast nomenclature is. I think saying 8 gigabyte and 16 gigabyte is more understandable to normies than XT, GRE, XTX, XT, non-XT, all of that, because look at what's happening with the 9070. You have the 9070, the 9070 XT, and the 9070 GRE. If you look at previous conventions of the 7900 GRE, 7900 XT, and 7900 XTX, you would think that the 9070 GRE, because it has a suffix, is better than the 9070, but that's actually not the case. It's worse than the 9070 when they added a suffix. The only way you know that is if you're deep into the enthusiast situation. Now, you can look at the VRAM amount of 12 gigabytes versus 16 gigabytes and be like, oh wow, the GRE has less VRAM than the non-GRE, just the 9070, 12 gigs versus 16 gigs, which is exactly what you would do with the 9060 XT. You would look at 8 versus 16. I don't think I'm being too optimistic about the general consumer. I think most people are being way too pessimistic about the general consumer. I think it's a fundamental difference in how we're gonna view how people approach things. You know, people pointed out like, oh, somebody bought an Xbox One X instead of a Series X because of the naming difference. Yeah, very few. Like, I'm sure there's an example of it. I'm sure there's ways you could point out that like there has been mix-ups in the past, but by and large, consumers can look at numbers and know the difference. Now, there could be conversations that need to happen specifically about certain pre-built companies that hide the VRAM amount when they're discussing what GPU they're selling. You know, if they just say it's a 9060 XT and don't disclose how much VRAM it has, that's a problem because that's just like not telling you how much RAM is in the PC. That's more so on the companies that are hiding the information than AMD who named it wrong. I just don't buy that argument. The 9060 XT 8GB is a fine name when it's a 9060 XT with 8GB of VRAM, and then there's a 9060 XT with 16GB of VRAM. Those are totally fine names that have sensible naming that denote specifically what that graphics card is about. I think it's so specific that it's helpful. And I think that adding an L or an LT or an XT or an XTX is actually less helpful because it requires you to understand what those are from the outside. And it presumes that you have the knowledge of what those distinguishers would be. And I think that's worse than pure numbers. That's gonna be my take on this matter. I understand that other people on the internet don't agree with me. I understand that this is a talking point that's being talked about by other big tech channels, and so this is just going to be a fundamental disagreement area that I have with the vast majority of the commenters. But you know, that's why we have comment response, so that we can discuss it. You guys can tell me I'm wrong, and I can agree or disagree. And you know, I mean, at the end of the day, part of this is opinion based. Part of this is, you know, presumption on intent and how you choose to perceive the world and consumers at large, and you know, the amount of faith that you have in humanity, which I understand that the average person in the PC gaming community often is pessimistic and cynical, but I would argue that that's not always the correct stance. And just because you can point out examples where people have made mistakes and then use that as a justifiable argument as to why everybody is that stupid, I don't buy it. I think that there's logical discontinuities in presuming things of the whole because you have specific examples of problems. And so you know, I'm sure that there's faults in my logic as well, right? Because I'm expressing things that I'm thinking, and maybe I haven't thought through all of it, and that's part of it. That's part of the conversation. You guys can point out errors in my thinking. I think a lot of the things that people pointed out as flaws in my argument from yesterday were not flaws in my thinking, but probably flaws in my communication of my thinking, because I'm just not convinced by any of the arguments that I've seen. And I think a lot of the arguments that I've seen of people telling me I'm wrong were things that I agreed with them on. So that's on me for not saying things properly in a way that's understandable. And I'm gonna understandably end this episode of Hot News. It's been a lot of comment response. The plan is not to talk about this too much tomorrow. Hopefully we get on to a new topic, and that's what I want. So if you want me to start a new topic in comment response tomorrow, comment something else. Give me something good to respond to.